So after 48 hours of rich conversations, we are at the last segment of the Raisina dialogue. And we have saved the best for last. We have excellent speakers lined up for the next 1 hour. We will first invite, and we are delighted to invite, Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, the President of the People's Justice Party of Malaysia, to deliver the valedictory address. He is the founder and leading figure of the party and was formerly leader of the opposition between 2008 and 2015. Mr. Ibrahim has had a long and distinguished political life and has had several government positions, including as Minister for Culture, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Education. He was widely praised for spearheading Malaysia's emergence and economic growth in the 90s when he held the position of Minister of Finance. He is also the person most responsible for the upbeat optimism around Malaysia today. We are indeed privileged and honored to have him speak to us at the dialogue and to deliver the valedictory address. Mr. Ibrahim, it's my privilege to invite you to speak to us this evening.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Let me begin with two statements commonly used to describe India, so much so that both could be deemed a cliché. One, India is an enigma. And two, India is a land of contradictions. Relax, I see some. I wholeheartedly disagree with the latter. While with regards to the former, I think we must accept that there is some element of truth. Whereas contradictions entail conflict, inconsistency, or even negation, enigma suffers bafflements, perplexity, even incomprehensibility. There are no contradictions here, but even to the seasoned observer, the enigma of polarities manifesting India's immense spectrum of diversity, generating limitless permutations and possibilities, requires us to reflect with humility to try and make sense of it all. I'm immensely pleased to be here today. I could not have predicted some month while bidding my time in solitary confinement, I will be standing here in New Delhi. I've been visiting India for over 4 decades, and it is a place which has taught me and all Malaysians a great deal about what it means to be a part of the rich civilization and to contribute positively to the noble pursuit of humanity. In a gathering such as this, we take stock of the past and endeavor to anticipate what lies ahead. The future remains an abstraction, constructed of our knowledge, understanding, action, and biases. With all the wisdom we can muster, we might just achieve the future for which we strategize, plan, and maneuver. The trouble is the future is now harder to perceive because we are immersed in the present uncertainties of post-normal times. Things are chaotic, changing with greater rapidity. Contradictions proliferate and are what we have to work with when basic assumptions about the way things ought to be are now uncertain and contested. What outcomes can we expect? At the conclusion of the 5th gathering of the Raisina dialogue, after many hours of careful deliberations, we find ourselves more and more buffeted by the old political dilemma. Events, dear boys, events. We have seen 9/11 and its aftermath in the war on terror. We have endured misguided wars in Iraq and Libya, a never-ending campaign in Afghanistan, the consequences of which are wreaking havoc across the region and the world. We saw the rise of the surveillance state and the erosion of civil liberties. We cannot ignore the long suffering of Syria and the torment of Yemen, which followed the failure of the Arab Spring and the genocides which have happened and are currently taking place in broad daylight. The worst financial crisis in generations was a crisis of America's own creation and has shone a bright light once again on the inevitable failure of unbridled capitalism, free markets, and unmitigated greed. What was supposed to be the end of history and the American century is mutating into something entirely different, darker, and more sinister. The mainstreaming of jingoism and the emergence of isolationist nationalism around the world. Can we say this is just events unfolding, or should we be more humble in recognizing the limitations of the prior analysis? Now let us consider that the very same time as the American century was instituted as a planning horizon, an alternative vision was gaining traction in academic discourse. It is neatly expressed in Andre Gunder Frank's title, Reorient. This is the advantage of being in prison. I have all the time and liberty to read books. The thesis is not just confined to predicting the coming economic empowerment of China and India or a coming Asian age. More profoundly, it is an argument about the illusory history and theoretical ideas woven around Western modernity as the origin of capitalism and globalism. The crucial message is the body of evidence amassed about Asian economic history. It is the reality of industry, productivity, innovation, trade, and connectivity which powered an Asian global economy that included Europe long before Europe erupted across oceans to recenter the world. The big picture, reoriented, is the present challenge that faces us all. We cannot afford to approach the future as a competitive zero-sum game. If the West is no longer in the driving seat, that does not mean the rise of Asia is inherently threatening. A world system is or can be a mutual, reciprocal, multifaceted interrelationship. Founded on the principles of social democracy, the state of India used to lord over economic policies, giving rise to extensive regulation and public ownership, not to mention sluggish growth and widespread corruption. But with economic liberalizations and reforms in 1991, India migrated to a market economy and by 2008 became the second fastest growing major economy in the world. Yet, while it continues to grow now, the flaws and symptoms commonly associated with the capitalist system, the so-called free market economy, are glaringly present. Apart from the immense wealth inequities, there are the millions caught in the middle income trap and hundreds of millions more caught in the quagmire of poverty. Corruption in its myriad varieties continue to plague the system. The enigma deepens when we realize that across the vast tracts of the second industrial revolution, with many still stuck to manual labor, we have oases of software programmers and techies heralding the fourth industrial revolution. With a gargantuan pool of half a billion workers, of whom 94% work in unincorporated enterprises, millions without access to electricity, let alone the internet, there emerges the city of Bangalore, India's very own Silicon Valley. This is nothing if not signifying the vast polarities in human capital development and the disparate state of knowledge economy. Yet, the enigma deepens when we consider India's rich culture and democratic process and contrast that against the autocratic, dictatorial regimes of some of her proximate neighbors. Speaking of which, China, the second largest economy, if not already the largest, loom large in the equation. Common sense tells us that it's not just in India's interest, but also in the strategic and commercial interests of all in the region that India maintains a balanced relationship with China. A balanced relationship is neither a master-servant nor superior-subordinate associations. Nevertheless, on account of the realities of the respective strengths and weaknesses of the parties concerned, it would take a great leap of the imagination to suggest that it will be a relationship inter pares. It is not entirely, for the big picture is that all of us, East and West, North and South, need to look back and record our understanding of history. Together as participants, we all need to look forward with a greater understanding of new possibilities. We must open our minds to alternative futures that are mutually supportive, collaborative, open and answerable to the diversity of our different requirements. Perhaps some inconvenient truth to begin with will remind us of atrocities that have been perpetrated in the name of religion, and in this regard, all are culpable. Medieval India witnessed many instances of temple destruction committed by rival Indian kingdoms against each other, attendant on conflicts between adherents of different deities, as well as between Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains. Later on, the Islamic expansion in India during the various phases saw the destruction of temples, Hindu in particular, again ostensibly in the name of religion. And if we dial back to the era of the Crusades, we are reminded of the mayhem and the bloodbath in the Eastern Mediterranean on account of wars to recapture the Holy Land from Muslim rule. It is hard to ignore these dynamics at work here in India. No country more publicly and vituperatively contests its own history, not to reclaim from colonizers, but to purge it on the presence of minorities. The awful history of communal violence that was the birth of Indian independence continues to be incited and tragically reenacted thanks to visions of the past that embraces the thesis of partition. We must be thankful for the Indian sages, historians, scholars, whose work reclaimed the open, tolerant mosaic of subcontinent's past. Hindu and Muslim need to recognize the mutual influences of their shared history. Whether that is the evidence of the early Mughals, engagement with Sanskrit learning, or being honest about the convivencia of popular religion and the mixing of our cultures out on the streets. Think of the living saints, whether Muslim or Hindu, whose lives of service to the needy, whoever they were, whatever their origin, exemplified the meaning of shared values and common humanity. The shrines where the saints were buried drew worshippers from all communities. However much religious purists might object and demur at this aspect of popular religion, it testifies that goodness and mercy are models we all appreciate. There is a moral lesson that we contemplate tackling insurgent ideologies. No one is won over by exclusionary ethics or self-aggrandizing fervor. It is common humanity that draws people together. The task is to find pragmatic means to accommodate diversity, to enable plurality to flourish without creating barriers and boundaries to common endeavor. We meet at a time of rising nationalism around the globe, fueled by Hydra-headed fear. The greatest fear is the fear of the other, of the motives, intentions, and aspirations of people deemed to be different. Closing borders, raising barriers, calls to rely on our own identity and to keep separate are spreading like a pandemic. What has been described as nativist economics in America is startling indeed. And in Europe, they call it nationalism. Let us not dupe ourselves by conflating nativism and nationalism or patriotism, for to my mind, it is nothing but a manifestation of unbridled populism. With the doubling down of its semantic cousins such as xenophobia, ultranationalism, jingoism, the anti-immigration discourse has morphed into toxic mutations of domestic racism, religious animosity, and communal hatred, with chronic race baiting and incitement to violence becoming an increasingly common occurrence. What is worse is that it blinds us from seeking solutions to the most pressing challenges facing humanity today: forced migration and climate change, the exploitation of natural environment, and addressing education inequality, uplifting the poor and the marginalized. These problems will only find solutions in initiatives which are innovative, collaborative, and inclusive. The resurgence of ultranationalism is a global phenomenon. It is a precursor to fear and present danger to peace and security. Extreme identity politics and polemics contribute to the conditions in which the seductive call to violence festers. We must reject it. Ladies and gentlemen, I still remember words of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the very embodiment of India, as he tells us India's tryst with destiny, and how at the stroke of midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. Well, in Malaysia, it wasn't exactly at midnight. But on May 9th, 2018, the people of Malaysia made their tryst with destiny by voting out a regime that had ruled the nation for more than 6 decades. At the 14th general elections, with the stroke of the mighty pen, Malaysians from all walks of life, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, and the indigenous tribes, signed their warrant to hand over power to Pakatan Harapan, the alliance of hope, if you will. And with that, a new era began for Malaysia. The peaceful transition of power was nothing short of remarkable. And I strongly believe that one of the most important reasons for this exceptional phenomenon is our very firm and consistent policy on communal and race relations. Indeed, during the run-up to the elections, the other side resorted to playing the race and religious card. And while that might have gained some traction, the fact is that the majority of the people rejected it in favor of cultural and religious inclusivity. No doubt, the voices of wreck and ruin will continue to be heard from those who would want to see the new government fail. The test for us, apart from ensuring the successful stewarding the economy, is to remain firm on our policy of eschewing all forms of extremism and fanaticism, and respecting diversity and embracing communal and religious harmony. If the world were to take one lesson from the Malaysian story, is this. Mind you, managing a coalition of bitter rivals and different ethnicities and religions is at times Olympic in the effort required. But we must not shy away from what is fundamentally right and good only because it is hard. I believe the generations which follow will look back at this inflection point in our history with appreciation that we fought tooth and nail for a country that embraces all. What is politically right cannot be morally wrong. What is morally right cannot be politically wrong. And that is to quote Gandhiji. The institutional reforms that are underway, including parliamentary reforms under my direction, are primed to take Malaysia on a new path of greater constitutional democracy, rule of law, and judicial independence. These changes will provide the foundation to ensure our democratic transition is not fleeting. Leadership is, of course, critical. But in the long term, it is the institutions that ensure protection of fundamental liberties, vibrant contestation of ideas in the social and public spheres, further empowerment of women, and with a proactive social justice agenda and greater distributive justice for the poor and the marginalized. Coming back to Asia and India, to my mind, if Asia does rise, the truth be told, it must be shorn of vain glory. As they say, history can liberate us, or it can incarcerate us. Our great opportunity in Asia, in this moment of upheaval and disruption, is to find new path to heal the divisive, demeaning, and demonizing ways of the past. It is the threshold across which we can transform the relationship. We could continue to be befuddled and bound by the poisoned legacy of contested meanings and ideas of the past, present, and future. Or we could rise above our prejudices and opt for real justice and peace that is equitable and fair to all. That noble path which calls to us, where we are unwavering in the commitment to principles which are universal and timeless, is a journey, albeit difficult, that can bring us to a better future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.